I will try to discuss, as I said, to Marta, which I thank you very much for the possibility to be here with you, about the idea of legacies of different political and administrative borders and entities in this area of the Upper Adriatic. I want to discuss this complicated area, which is very hard to name and to organize in a conceptual, unified manner, because there are so many readings of the past, which are actually part of also our topics today, because many of these changes of borders and the different are linked with different ways to see these areas and different ways to represent it from the people who were actually in some way in hegemonic places to produce meanings about a place, but also there were the people which were living it in different manners. I will try to explain a little bit this area, starting from this aspect of considering the area, of naming the area as being produced by different historians or in general authorities. So starting from the 19th century, I will be focusing on how political authorities and intellectuals have justified or legitimized the existence of modern political entities, elaborating geographical and historical analysis and narratives. As the formation and confirmation administrative units have been usually accompanied with linguistic and visual representation, which reiterated and negated the relevance of geomorphological points of reference, historical legacies, and also the presence and absence of the other as a source of representation of further or alternative visions of these areas. So let's first start from, before we were talking about maps and how every map is actually like reading the area from a source of a kind of perspective. This is without any point of reference, but of course it's cut in a way, which is already a way to interpret and represent the area. Then you see that I used, Upper Adriatic, Northeastern Adriatic. There's also Northern Adriatic. I had a discussion with Board Club because he says Upper Adriatic is actually already a translation from Alto Adriatico, that means more Italian. I usually never stress so much the difference between Northern and Upper Adriatic, maybe he is right. Some other people use Northeastern Adriatic to try to get out of all these ways in which this area has been read throughout the 19th, 20th century in a very political way. First of all, of course, when it's a Julia, which comes from the 1860s, stressing the link between Venice and the Julian legacy, the Venetian and Julian legacy into this area. You will see that in every history of Istria or of this area, by Italian historiography, usually the start is Rome and Venice and the so-called Venezia and Istria as the 10th regions of the Roman Empire. It's interesting how actually this particular, of course it's not named the fact that this part of Istria, like which is considered always like Italian or part of the historical legacy of Italy, this kind of perspective was not only not the whole history, but also it was just a very brief period of time of the Roman Empire. So actually, all the other moments in which the administration of Istria or Venice were not together or was not in this way are not really important for this narrative. Then we have, of course, the Julius Cacrina and Julian March, which are usually just a translation of an Julian, but trying to get out of difficulty of dealing with Venice, or of course trying to make out of this naming to transcend the Venetian legacy and to insist on other form of legacy, which may be the Alps. And then, of course, there's the Primorska, the Primorie, there's the Hrvatska Primorie, or Northwest Slovenian version, which, of course, is not the same area. very few times has been cut as a unified region. The Adriatic littoral, the Cristallana, is actually one of the ways in which this region had a sort of unitarian administrative and political construction, even though, of course, there was something that I will stress on more, which is the municipal autonomy of this town, the Margrave of Istria and the county of Gorica and Venecia, which were part of this area, and was already complicated in the time of the 19th century when this was enforced, this administrative political union, part of the Habsburg Empire. Let's say the idea actually starts already from the 18th century, but as a unitary land of the Habsburg Empire, more strongly from the end of Napoleon to the end of World War I. But already in this area, in this period, there was of course the idea of Trieste and Istria as somehow connected or not connected according to different political views of the area. And here, of course, there is one town which is Reke, which is not part of this area, which had stronger links with this outer part anyway, but also at least a part of the central part of Istria. So every cut, of course, leaves a space for other forms of activities, from economic activities, social activities, which cannot be included all in the definition of the area. That's why many historians especially from the Christian perspective, actually, it's usually Rijeka, Trieste, or Trs, or Nistra. Then, of course, you have Gorizia, then you have Friuli. So it's a complicated area, which sometimes in mapping, one of the easiest things that has been doing from the beginning is also to cut the area according not to the administrative borders, but also looking at the census or the ethnographic maps which have been produced. And this, for instance, is something that leaves, it's a Slovenian, and Croatian, and Romance or Italian languages or dialect. Of course, this was criticized. It was an ethnographic map, it was not a census, it was criticized from other, especially from Italian, which see that they seem somehow limited in this percentage of their presence in the area. So Carlo Schiffer, in trying to represent, using also census which were more favorable to Italian presence, thanks to the language use of the Ungarische, use this technique to show that actually it is true that maybe actually here there are more, Italians are actually a little more dispersed even in the area. But it is actually the demographic portion of Fiume, Trieste, Reke, and Trs, and Pula, Pola, and Gorizia, which actually shows the strength of the Romance or Italian presence. Then, of course, you will have afterwards the Cadastro which Joseph Rokovich worked at this and analyzed the census of 1945, and of course adopting a different kind of representation of the area, which stresses the Slavic presence in their own little villages, because the cities and the countries, and I will come back into that, and little villages, let's say the cities and the little villages are two spatial and economic different areas in which has been sometime relevant in the history of this area, but are also in a way important for our discourse, because very often in the past they were administrated in different ways, and the cities had a sort of administrative legacy through the former statutes and municipal identities which they carried on in the future. And it's, of course, then it's interesting that from the same years in which pretty much which was based pretty much on this this kind of map, in which you can see that the presence of the Slavic population is definitely stronger than the Roman population in this area of Central Istria. If you actually present, and this is how many historians do, using the Italian historians, of course, or somehow historians for a wider public, maybe not professional historians, but also professional historians have been doing, using, for instance, this kind of map, which is particular, because this map goes back to one of these two big interpretations of the area as, from the Italian historiography, as in which the Romans or the Italian presence is stressed through a sort of political presence. These black spots are all black spots of the cities or municipalities in which the Italian, or a part which can be considered Italian for those areas of the 19th century, was at the head of the state, of the city, was actually ruling the municipality. And so this way actually we have a perception of the area which is completely different from the others. Now, I'm not going to the census analysis because this is not part of our discussion. But it is true that this is different ways to read a shared past in the same area, but in which somehow the legacies of the cities is also one, as I was saying, is one of the ways and the difference between the city and the countryside has been often used as one of the interpretative ways to read the Istrian, but also in general the Upper Adriatic case, like say a Roman city and a Slavic countryside. That is also adherent to another views to read the cities in Central Europe as alien cities, in which somehow the population of the cities is showed through the written sources that we can find, and actually leaves a space also throughout the other the history that goes on when the Habsburg Empire ends in different nation states which come in the 20th century as an area which was actually in its urban space dominated by one nationality and therefore addressed to that nationality, let's say involved in Polish or Italian Trieste, and we have other cases like that. But at the same time, you see, this idea of an alien city takes away which were actually the non-dominant languages or the social stratum which were not appearing so often in documents and in political, at the level of the political power. And also cities are something which is very much changing, and if a city was actually maybe determined by some sort of statues and privileges or walls and delimited in the past in its space towards the countryside, in the 19th century the urbanization and modernization process actually changes the border of cities in a way that actually the city goes to the peasant or the peasants go to the city. But the city often, through its power, through its power bodies, doesn't recognize the presence of actually where the peasants in the city once the city is enlarged. Another way through, which goes also into the matter of our topic, is to read the history of also in the 19th and 20th century of this area, especially in Istria, really looking at the border between, which was around 400 years alive, between Venice and the Venetian Republic and the Austrian Empire inside of Istria. So this is the Venetian Istria, this is the Austrian Istria. This border disappeared actually at the end of the 18th century with the end of the Venetian, Republic. So you have actually a transfer of people in both ways, from Central Istria to the coast and from coast to the Central Istria. It's somehow reinforcing that ideas of cities dominated by either a merchant or an upper class, which bring speaking mainly Romance languages. So somehow reinforcing the other sort of interpretation. These are all actually way in which the past has been read in this area. This is the Italian provinces, how after World War I were actually built and crafted in the area. And this is, for instance, a very particular province of Rijeka, which was now from 1924 part of the Italian kingdom, in which you see there is not only Italian and Croatian population, but there is also very strong Slovenian population, which is actually also present in the same town of Rijeka, and usually it's pretty much neglected. And our mayor also stresses that he had some time enough of this discussion of Italian Rijeka or Croatian Rijeka, but it was also Slovenian. Actually, is right. As of course, there was also a Hungarian strong population in Rijeka. But what we have been called today to talk is also to speak about repeated manifestation of their borders. Let's say that is alternative and persistent spatial motions and practices. Before we were having an example of very good coffee here outside, which was actually coffee by somebody who lives in a space of where the coffee is somehow a transnational habit and ritual and appreciated, which is somebody from Nova Gorica, and who brought that machine, as I understood, which is the director of this museum. But of course, when we go to other sort of habits, from the what is called, space view or the lived space, eating is of course one way to go across borders and also signify the still persistence of former orders of former interaction, which was we're going along the border and now. Okay, they're going across the border. So. Capuzzi, Želje, Struder, Presnec, and so on. But revolution, so leaving the space in some time in a transgressive way against what are the borders in that movement. So even considering somehow, let's say, Istria as a place where, let's say, Koper and Lovran as legitimization to be part of Istria, or let's say, still going on in this part of, along this Venetian-Austrian border, as it was still recognized along the 20th century between Slavic population calling the other Venetiani or Krabievci, that is Venetians or royals, which were people which were living along this great line. Other ways in which this is interesting to see, of course, is analyzing the rivers, as it was said. The river Reke was the border between Italy and Yugoslavia between 1924 and 1945. It's interesting that this border, that this river actually in Italian has a name which is not always sure which one it is, because in 19th century or 18th century, sometime in Italian accounts you find the word dediščina, and then you find the word Fiumara, and then you find the fascists who actually adopted the word Ene, which sounds more Italian. But the thing is that in general, languages are a way to subversively go again against the situation which is presented in a moment according to, let's say, the hegemonic culture. So you have, it's normal that Italians in Rijeka after World War II, which was part of Yugoslavia and then Croatia, using their language strategies which are part of Croatian or Italian or even Venetian legacy. And Venetian is a dialect which was never part of an administrative sense in Venice and Trieste, but it's still, it's part of the local language there. And Rijeka, which is interesting, was present definitely until the 70s as a way in which not only the people which are considered themselves part of the Italian community can have 1 minute more, but also by the Croatian population, which were still using the Venetian dialect until Other strategies are also the one about, let's say, putting the kids to an Italian school, even from people who are not part of the Italian minority. And then I had another part of my discussion, which was about the what I call iconoclasm or secular iconoclasm, which is one way as a way to actually negate the presence of former legacies, which is, let's say, the lions in the mission. Maria studied that, also Rijeci, which is destruction of the lion, or put them in a museum, or let's say the double-headed eagle in the Reke, which has been first cut, whose head has been one of the two heads has first been cut by the nuntius legionaries, and then completely removed by the Yugoslavs. And in Croatian, actually, there is, so you see, let's say, the symbols from 45 to 67, the eagle or double-headed eagle or any symbol is not appearing. And then what happens? Only in 1998 the eagle comes back. From 67 to 98, there is a way to signify the unification of Reke by these three areas, which is Sušak, Zadna, and the old Reke. And but at that time, there was only by cropping the possibility to use a common symbol, and which again is about talking about the two areas of Reke, which were once divided into Sušak and the old Reke. Habsburg Reke, corpo separato, which come now together in the water that comes in